So we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad that we can meet via Zoom and not have to make anybody go out through this weather, which is pretty appalling this evening. My name is Andrea Oakwatch, and I'm the Assistant Director at Oakland Planning and Development Corporation. We have a very full schedule this evening because there are two pretty big topics here that we would like to be able to cover. These are topics that are ongoing, which is to say we don't expect for a second that we're going to answer everybody's questions this evening and that this is going to be the only opportunity. This is more, there are issues of some urgency we want to make sure that people are aware of, and we want to make sure that we can constructively frame the conversation going forward. So I hope during the course of today, if you have questions, you can speak up. You can drop your questions into the chat and we will read those. However you would most feel comfortable interacting with the presenters today and making sure that your questions get addressed. If we aren't able to answer your question this evening, we will at least read it in and we will make sure that we get an answer back as quickly as we can. So thank you very much for joining. This is intended to be an interactive meeting and a conversation, not just a bunch of presentations. So yes, I do hope that you will please ask questions and engage and let us know how you feel. I'm going to introduce now Elena Zaitsev, who is the chair of Oakwatch, and Elena is going to take this portion from there.
Thank you, Andrea. We always start with the Oakwatch mission statement. The Oakland Code Enforcement Project works to improve the quality of life in Oakland by bringing people and institutions together to identify code violations, advocate for their remediation, and monitor the outcomes. Given the recent Wells Fest event, we wanted to get some people together to get some answers and talk about permitting and enforcement for student events and student behaviors related to those events and also to trash. We were under the impression that the city, the university, and the police put coordinated plans into place so an event such as Wells Fest didn't happen again. Given the time needed for this topic and our second big topic of zoning, just as important, we won't be having the usual Oakwatch reports tonight, so please check the Oakwatch website for those reports. We are pleased to be joined by Kenyon Bonner, Vice Provost for Student Affairs for the University of Pittsburgh, Carla Panzella, Dean of Students for Pitt, Officer Crowell, City of Pittsburgh Zone 4 Police, and we may be joined by other police and some representatives from council offices. Is there anyone I have forgotten?
I see that we have Jamie Cunningham with us as well from Pitt Police. Hello, Jamie.
Hi, Jamie. Sorry, I forgot you.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, okay. Unfortunately, no one from the city office that grants the permits was able to attend tonight. Now, I know some questions were sent to you ahead of time, and I would like to get started with the folks from the University of Pittsburgh. So whoever knows the answer, just jump in. And as Andrea said, we want to keep this interactive. So I'm just going to kick it off with that. Knowing about the block party permit, why wasn't the event being closely monitored on social media and then as it unfolded?
Hi, Elena. Yeah, I'll start out with that one. Yeah,
Thank you.
Yep. We became, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. I know the weather is not great, but I'm happy to be here and hopefully you're all staying dry. So we were made aware of the application for permit in advance of that Saturday. And there were several folks from Pitt who were involved in talking to the city as well as following up with the students to be proactive. It's just what we normally do when things are on our radar. And so a lot of proactive engagement and follow up with the students was taking place, as well as conversations. Eventually the permit was approved. And so the students had the sort of opportunity to do that through the process that's been laid out for them. We obviously, as a university, we have 30,000 people in our community if we're just counting students. we definitely monitor social media for things that may be important for us to have on our radar. And that was the case for this particular weekend. There was, a lot going on, and this was something that we were looking for. However, there was nothing on social media that we saw prior to this event or during the event. Our team became aware of this event on Wellsford when the police, interacted with the students and told them that they needed to shut down the event because there were, people there that had spilled into other streets. And at that point, that's really not what the permit allowed them to do. And so we try to do a lot of things proactively. One, follow up with students prior to events to have conversations with them about our expectations and what their plans are. During the event, there was no social media activity, so that we didn't have a sense that people were converging in any particular location, although we monitor that. But as soon as the police responded, the Pitt police, we did become aware of what had occurred. And I think that's when all of us started to talk about what our follow-up would be in response to that event. So I hope that answers your question. So we have things in place, but with 30,000 people, not everything pops up on social media, but our police are there, and they did their job when they became aware of the concern and shut that event down.
If I could follow up and ask, our understanding was that Engagement and Community Affairs were aware of the permit when it was first issued, and that there had been actually a proactive conversation that the police had with the organizers in advance of the event to be able to make sure that the kids knew the rules about behavior. What was the outcome of that conversation?
Andrea, hi, this is Lena Dastilio. Hi to those of you on the call that I may not know, or somehow I do. I work in engagement and community affairs. And yeah, Andrea, I just want to recap. Absolutely. Our office was the first office to receive notice that application had been filed. And that's what sets into motion the proactivity that Provost Bonner was speaking about. So that's actually what leads us to have a conversation with other offices on campus. Those offices then reach out, have those developmental conversations with the students. I think it's probably best for somebody from Pitt Police to answer to, what is our protocol around those kind of proactive conversations from the police end of things. Jamie, I don't know if that's you or another colleague who's here tonight, but we want to make sure that we're just sharing as much information as we can.
From my understanding, there was that conversation, but what I can definitely say, the proactive part during the event is that we had officers patrolling that area. We were aware of the permit. They were patrolling the area to make sure it was still contained to Wellsford. And like Dean Bonner said, once it started overflowing to another street, which is Zulema, the shift supervisor shut down the party an hour early that the permit allowed. So the permit had stated that it was 7 o'clock for the party to be over, the block party. It was over at 6 o'clock. And once all of the students start dispersing and leaving the street, the officers, the shift supervisor spoke with the individual that had that permit and advised them that the street needed to be cleaned up before the street reopened, in which they all did. And they complied. They were okay with that. There was no confrontation. The students did what they needed to do to make sure the street reopened and it was clean.
My understanding is that whatever the permit was, there is a limit on the number of people who were allowed on it as a block party. So I think the number is about 200. So how did it get from 200 to over 1,000? Like why was it allowed to grow? You said as long as it stayed on Wellsford, which is good, but there was also a number of people allowed, and it went way over the number of people that were allowed. So why wasn't it shut down when the number of people got too high?
That's when it did get shut down, when it started overflowing. I understand that you are saying that it says it was limited to 200 people. I'm actually looking at the permit right now, and it says it's for the neighbors, the person for the permit. It doesn't state a specific number. If you have something different, please, by all means, but I'm looking at this block party permit and it does not state how many people. So we can just do that from there. But once it starts overflowing, our officers shut the party down.
The document, I mean, just to break in here, the documentation I found online said it's like 100 and like 200 people that live there, and 200 is where the guest list can grow to make it 200. I mean, and you can see the picture there. That's like 1,000 just in the picture. It's wall to wall kids from porch to porch, covering every single square inch of the street, every inch of the sidewalk, every inch of the porches, the steps, and that's only, I'd say, maybe half of Wellsford right there. And also on the application, it also says they're supposed to have a plan for if it gets out of hand. That's not like, that didn't just happen in 5 minutes. That's 1,000 kids didn't converge on that in 5 minutes. So whoever was running it should have at the very least shut the DJ down, which is again in the, I don't know if they can play that, but you can see the DJ, he's just bouncing and spinning. You know, there's no way that should have ever got where it got. And I don't know what the penalties are for not following that, but at the very least, all of those organizers should be banned for life from having another party similar to Semple Fest being shut down when they had bonfires in the middle of the street.
Yeah, that's just out of our realm of banning someone from a permit. That is definitely not what we do, because we don't give the permits out.
Officer Cunningham, if I,
Well, just to,
if I might.
So just to speak to that too, so that would be a violation of city code, which I would expect the university to clamp down on too, because that's just a ridiculously flagrant violation of both code and health issues.
Mark, I appreciate that point. And I just want to jump in and kind of recap for everybody here just a couple of different things. First and foremost, you know, as a university, we want to see our students behaving in a healthy, safe, respectful way. One of the things that has happened in the intervening, I guess, weeks since this particular incident, is we've had an opportunity, Provost Bonner, myself, Andrea Oakwatch, to sit down and talk about how can we give the city more feedback about the ways that they're taking information for block party permits. How can we start to provide that kind of input as an institutional partner, community partners, for them to be able to create the standards by which people are applying for and the standards through which those kind of permits are granted. Officer Cunningham did mention, you know, the university is not responsible for either evaluating or granting these kinds of permits. We are, however, very interested stakeholders in how this both impacts our neighbors, how it impacts our students. I appreciate what you were able to find online in terms of the documentation. But unfortunately, the version of the permit that was granted that we've seen did not specify a number of attendees at all. That is something that's important to take into account. It's very difficult to enforce what is an oversized crowd when you're not given that sort of reasonable standard of actual numbers to go by. But here in what we're trying to achieve today is an acknowledgement that first and foremost, we do not want to see out of hand street-based parties. We do not want to see our students behaving in a manner that's not healthy and safe. We absolutely take proactive steps to make sure that we're talking with our students. We are very interested in working with our neighbors to make sure that we're in a conducive, productive relationship and that we help our students to be in the same. We are not in any way suggesting that this party was, you know, acceptable, great, okay, but we are saying this is the circumstances under which it happened, and we're interested in having productive conversations to think through, are there additional ways that we can shore up the ways that our students are seeking permits, any student, any person are seeking permits, and how those are granted.
I happen to be a numbers person. You can count the number of people, the number of buildings on Wellsford. You can assume that they're 2-unit. Put 6 people in each. Multiply by how many there are. Let each one have a couple of friends. That's common sense, how many people you should have seen on the street. And there was probably triple that. as a safety, I mean, I'm talking to the police here. From a safety point of view, they were shoulder to shoulder. There was no way a safety vehicle could have gotten through. I think that's one of the requirements as well. And that was ignored. Why was that ignored? I guess is the question coming out of that. I'm just dumbfounded that it was allowed to go from, you know, a block party, what is considered a block party for the residents and maybe a friend or two, to over 1,000, you know, dangerous situation over 1,000.
Elena, I just want to point out that I think Lieutenant Crowell from Zone 4 has his hand up and might want to chime in.
I'm not in charge of allowing.
All right, by all means, please unmute yourself, Eric, and please provide whatever it is that you'd like to say. I didn't mean to leave you hanging. Thanks.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I'm glad that everybody had a chance to speak on it so far. My name is Eric Crowell. I'm a lieutenant, obviously, of the Pittsburgh Police, and I'm also the acting commander currently of the Zone 4 police station, which obviously includes Oakland. For Wellsford Street, obviously direct questions should be answered by the permit office, the special events permit office, but we did talk to them prior to this and after this. If you know the history of this street, back in 2018, there was a party there that they applied for a permit. The answers that they gave on that permit were absolutely false. It was advertised on social media to, you know, bring your marijuana, bring your alcohol and stuff like that. They caught wind of that, and I believe they had problems at that party. And ever since then, basically, they looked to shut them down. In 2019, I guess, they did an unpermitted party on that. And I wasn't here during that time, so I can't necessarily comment on everything that happened. But from what I understand, there were multiple citations issued during that instance. There was nothing last year, obviously, because of COVID. For this year, this one individual who applied for the permit came to the special events office. Because of the history of that, they did look and scrutinize that permit, and it was even, I believe, reviewed by the city's law department, and there were strict parameters given to that person about cleaning up the trash and the amount of people that could be there. Also, the notifications that have to be made to the residents and the other things that had to occur while that was there. So with that, they were told by the special events office that any violation of that, the party would be shut down immediately. And that was monitored by our Zone 4 officers and also by the Pitt police officers. On that day, there was weather that's very similar to what we have today. It was a very kind of stormy day. So the party started at 2 p.m. Some of our officers ran past there. The storms came through, and it was kind of a very quiet event. After the storms, and I believe there was a Pitt game that day or some type of university event, the crowds grew very quickly. At that point, the Pitt police being there, they saw this and they saw that it was spilling over, and they shut the party down immediately, as we stated. To the best of my knowledge, everything was cleaned up as they agreed to do. I think that there were some issues in regards to them, the questions that he was asked and the things were on there, and obviously that's going to lead to greater scrutiny when it comes to that. Block party permits are for that particular block. They're meant for the neighborhood and for the people. That being said, you can't necessarily stop people from just walking in there. So there's kind of a catch with that. And obviously in a university area, that could be a problem. With that, like I said, though, they didn't have a legal reason to turn down the permit. And that came from the law department. And like I said, we did monitor that day. My officers monitored that day along with the Pitt police. And as promised, when the party grew outside the parameters of what it was supposed to be, at that point, the party was shut down.
Well, I'm glad to hear that they were told that there was a limit on the number of people, but unfortunately, that didn't make it onto the permit. So then it couldn't be used. I guess the police didn't know that there was a number of people on the permit. So that's one thing that that needs to happen when you talk to the city about changing that permit application.
I can't say that there is, I think they were told that there could be a reasonable amount of people on that, and that the inference, and I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't know this for 100% fact, but I believe that it was told around a level of about 300 people, because you count the amount of people on the block. And obviously, you know, it's not just saying that you have to show an ID that's your address there. Obviously, in situations like that, you might have, you know, a couple friends or neighbors or something like that who wander on there. Obviously, in this case, it was kind of seized upon by people from the outside to get there. And like I said, when that became an issue, the Pitt police directly shut the party down. And from what I understand, I don't, and again, I could be missing something here, but I think the residents there, we didn't have any complaints of damage. We didn't have any trash left over, and the party dispersed without incident. We didn't have any citations or arrests or anything listed there. So it did grow rather large, but I think that it was completely monitored. I do know that for a fact during the whole time. And I think when it became an issue and it went outside the parameters, as we had warned them previously, that was immediately shut down. In speaking with the special events office, and like I said, I think he would be a great, Mr. Cates would be a great person to have up there to give you a little bit more insight, because obviously he's the one who issues the permits and not us. But there's definitely going to be some extra scrutiny with some of these permits on there. But like I said, I think that the measures we had to grant the permit, and the measures that we put in place, I think were very effective at handling the issue when it arose.
So our understanding is that open carry laws are suspended for block parties so that it would be possible for neighbors to come and enjoy a beer together in the street. However, it's easy to document if you just do a little tiny bit of sleuthing with the photographs of the kids that posted on Instagram and all sorts of things about their attendance at this event, that there are plenty of 19-year-olds there with cups. And the question had to be like, why would it be that there would have been no citations for drunk or disorderly conduct? Why should there not have been any disciplinary actions that would have proceeded from this event? Why, if you knew who the organizers were, would there be no university disciplinary proceeding that would come out of, from violating the very specific terms that Pitt Police discussed with them in advance?
Andrea,
Sorry, was that
there were, oh, go ahead, Lieutenant.
No, I was just going to say, I thought that was a question directed towards the university and not myself on that, because we started mentioning university discipline.
Andrea, during that time, since there wasn't, who was speaking?
John Tokarski.
Oh, go ahead, John.
I can tell you, I had a long discussion today with our Deputy Director of Public Safety, as well as Brian Cates. We feel bad with what happened. We held the student to his word, and the word was practical, as the whole thing should have been practical. And that puts a certain burden on the students. They're not kindergartners. They know what they were doing. They knew what we had asked and requested. We cannot deny the permit. Legally, we're not permitted to deny it, but it will be extreme critical review of anything that's applied for or similar to that. Like I said, Pitt Police and our police were there. And all we could do now is try to address how we're going to fix it in the future. But I agree with Lieutenant Crowell. If there was underage drinking and it's a violation of the school policy, I would think the Pitt Police, not to throw the Pitt Police under the bus, that they've been the first ones to address this issue.
John, do you know what any fines or other consequences for the organizers for breaking those rules?
Not that we're aware of, and I can tell you this: we reviewed our rules for 911 calls. The city would see no 111 calls, none whatsoever. Lieutenant Crowell might be able to reflect if there was any issued by the city police, but I don't have any record of any.
I have a
I believe
question.
that
If I'm understanding you correctly, I mean, I don't think anybody here questions the validity of the permit.
Right.
However, there were obviously violations. And if I'm understanding what you're saying, there were no citations, there were no consequences for any violations, not only to the permit, but to underage drinking, overcrowding, like a scene like that, and there were no violations from anyone?
Mrs. Gallagher, there were citations issued, not at that party, but during that day, whether they came from Wellsford or whether they came from somewhere else. The issue with when a crowd dispersed peacefully and there's no conflict, and we start going around asking individuals for their IDs and seeing if they are underage, then we got a profiling situation going on. But there were citations issued throughout that day, whether they came from that party or they came from the game, wherever they may be. But everyone at that party dispersed peacefully. There was no issue.
And I think I want to first of all just reiterate what Lena said. I think, you know, our role as a university, we're here because, you know, we're partners in this, and you know, we've made it clear to our students. We've been out in the community. I've been on Wellsford Street that while legal, they had a permit, and technically there's no evidence that they violated that we could hold them accountable to the police or us because of maybe some things that we need to shore up with the permit process. It doesn't mean that our expectations were not, that their behavior was appropriate in terms of being a good neighbor and really being mindful and respectful of the community. And so those are the conversations we're having with our students. That has always been the conversation that we'll have. And that's why we've been out in the community talking to students, specifically on Wellsford Street. So we're here to talk about, is there a way that we can have a process in place that provides more informed information so that whoever is deciding can make a decision based on the information that's been asked for. It also helps us on the back end hold students accountable when we have facts that they have violated the law or the permit or our student code of conduct. So when we have evidence, we can follow up and handle that appropriately. And we do that quite effectively with our students, but without evidence, we're not going to do that. We're not going to violate our students' rights. So aside from that, you know, we want our students to do better. And while they may have had good intentions and wanted to have a block party, it got out of control and there were way too many people there for the community. And so those are the conversations that we have with them. That's our expectation, that they do a better job and be mindful of how you manage a party, the impact it might have on the community and your neighbors, as well as the participants of that party. So we're here in that spirit. I think, you know, I like to, you know, continue our efforts to figure out how to prevent something like that from happening in the future, and also allow us to be able to have evidence that we can reasonably follow up and hold students accountable if they violate policies and procedures or city code permits and all of those things. This is an unfortunate situation that happened, but I think it's a learning experience primarily for our students. I think there were consequences, maybe not to everyone's satisfaction, but they wanted to have a party to 7 o'clock, it got shut down. All those people had to go home, and whatever they had invested or had hoped for didn't happen because the police stepped in, and the consequence was, we're going to shut down your party. Now, in the future, we look forward, are these events happening? Are they being repeated? I don't believe so. That doesn't mean that they never will, but I think the message from us was clear that while you were legally able to do that and you had a permit, it's not our expectation that you have that type of event in the community that we live in. It's really not mindful and respectful of our role as good neighbors. So I do want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. And I think that's probably one of the most important parts of this conversation of what we can do moving forward.
So thank you very much for that. We do appreciate that truly. I particularly appreciated last year, obviously during different circumstances when the university had explicit guidance about gathering sizes and so forth, you walking around with other representatives of Pitt's hierarchy to try and educate students who were getting together in gatherings that may have stretched the limits a bit. There's been a particular issue, I mean, not to the same scale as this Wellsford issue, but there have been a number of house parties, especially in central Oakland, in and around the Oakland Square area, for example, where the police have been called and have had to break up, hundreds of students in a single building. And the problem that central Oakland had experienced a great deal, and I know South Oakland also is experiencing in past years of roving groups of drunk students looking for the next house party, has recurred, has come back. After a lovely 1.5 years hiatus. And so the question, I guess, that I would ask to sort of follow up is what kinds of actions can the university take for those smaller, but still even actually more disruptive types of events than this kind of, daytime shut down a particular street. This is stuff that's happening at midnight in and amidst residential areas where long-term residents live and are trying to sleep, and it creates dangerous situations, as you know. So,
yeah, I mean, proactively, we'll continue to be out into the neighborhoods. Like I said, we were out in the community. We have a few scheduled in the coming weeks to be out and talking to students at that time of night. I think when students are cited by the police for breaking a law, which could potentially be a violation of our student code of conduct, those students are referred to the Office of Student Conduct and they go through our conduct process. We don't disclose how we manage every student's conduct process, but that does happen. But we need a citation, and we need information that a student has allegedly violated our student code of conduct. So all of those things are in partnership with the police and law enforcement. So the proactive is us being out, just talking to students and letting them know that we're here in Oakland. And the other part is, unfortunately reactive. If there are laws that are violated, our police or the city police will cite students. And when that information comes to us and there's an allegation that it possibly violated our code of conduct, those students go through the conduct process, and then if they're found responsible, they face consequences for that. So those are some of the ways that we try to manage that on a day-to-day basis. While also balancing, allowing our students to exercise their rights and be, full members of the community, while also respecting the community members that they live with. It's a nuanced situation that I think, takes a lot of time and attention and energy.
I have a couple questions in the chat that I'd like to be able to go through if I may. I'm sorry, Elena, is this
Lieutenant Crowell, you had your hand up again. Is there something you wanted to add?
Sorry, I'm working off my phone. I just forgot to lower it there. That's my mistake.
Okay, and I want to mention that we have been joined by Bob Charland from Councilman Krause's office. So Bob, if you have information to any of this conversation, just
yeah, I feel bad because I did enter a little bit late, and I apologize. I was at a funeral. So I don't want to repeat anything that anyone else said. Liz, if you don't mind, send me a message here about asking about the conditions that were attached to the permit. Were those discussed at any point?
Yes, and that there wasn't a number of people put on the permit. So then the planners couldn't be held to that number when it grew exponentially.
Yeah, so I mean, right, I see in the conditions here that they were rotating, well, the applicant anticipated 100 people. The city believed that it was going to be closer to 200 or 300. The other point that I wanted to put that was attached there, the city required that there would be no central source of alcohol. So any consumption of alcohol had to be at private residences of the residents and associates. And the one last point was that he had made contact with all the residents of the block, aside from, I guess, 2 dwellings there. So that was all on the application that he submitted with the special events department, which was vetted by the city's law department. But again, I don't know how redundant I'm being, so I do apologize for that.
No, you're kind of confirming what we said is in the application process, but apparently when they issued the permit, they did not put some of that information on the printed permit so that the police could or could not enforce that when they got there.
Gotcha. Okay. And the only other thing, I think somebody else mentioned this, I think I heard John Tokarski mention it. You know, so this did go through vetting from the legal department. And essentially what they came back with, and I think this is kind of, it's not the scenario we'd like, but just the reality was that there was no precedent for the city to deny an applicant based on the fact that a similar event had happened in the past. So with a new applicant, you know, this would have been a violation of First Amendment rights if we would have denied that application for this event. So again, you know, I think that all needs to and will be scrutinized further going forward. But that was what you know, the city's top lawyers said, you know, last time. So.
But can I ask, who were the 2 residents on the street that didn't sign or didn't agree?
I don't. Yeah, I don't have that information. Well,
I'm willing to bet it's the 2 long-term residents that have been putting up with this situation.
There are 2
Here.
homeowners.
Yes, 2 homeowners.
it doesn't say. Yeah, I don't have names, but actually that is kind of what the bullet point reads. So I do believe that is the case.
But can't, my understanding by reading the special event rules, can't they request a petition signed by all residents of the
100%.
block before they issue the permit? Did they do that?
I talked with Brian Cates about that today, and he said that is in the rules. It's not something they often enforce.
Would have been a good time.
They should have.
Well, and especially if there was some, you know, there's whatever the discussion was, well, we can't deny the permit because of previous events, but we can sure as hell require the petition because of the prior events. I mean, again, looking at Semple Fest, you know, they knew that's a problem. They knew that's something that probably should never happen again. And I'm you know.
100%, Mark. Couldn't, you know, I agree. As I dug in a little bit more, that is a requirement. That would have been a better block than, or a better way to block it than worrying about violating First Amendment rights. So, agreed.
Andrea?
I just wanted to say that there's a bunch of different questions that are in the chat, and I'd encourage everybody to look at those. But I'd like to pull out a couple specifically here that will help us to kind of maybe wrap this up. I would love to be able to talk about this much more in length, and I know that many people are going to have many more things they'd like to say about this. We don't have time to keep going too much longer, but we do have time to answer a few questions yet. One of the questions that we have here is, who is responsible for the property damage that the bands of party goers do on a weekly basis? So like if, for instance, you have groups of drunken students who are going past your property and damaging it as you go, you know, is there any recourse for a property owner under those circumstances? Not everybody at once.
As far as law enforcement goes, if that person's caught in the act, that person's going to be held responsible and be cited for disorderly conduct, criminal mischief, and they'll have to reimburse the property owner for what damages they did to their property.
is it sufficient to get somebody's face on camera in a case like that? Like, what kind of documentation is appropriate? Or do they need to be like specifically apprehended by a police officer doing the thing?
Well, if we got
We also
identified,
need a complainant.
Okay,
the,
so the
And to
property
call
owner
in
needs
real
to be
time.
willing to be the complainant and be on record with the filing the complaint.
yes, you need a victim.
And then you also need some kind of evidence about who is responsible. What kind of evidence is appropriate?
We'll catch them in person. We could use the video evidence, pull the video from their house if they want to forward it to us. Witnesses that may know that person that did that damage, so on and so forth like that. Also like to add the parties and the criminal mischief, like you're saying. We like Pitt Police would like you, everybody in the neighborhood to call in real time. It's difficult to handle parties that happen when you call us Monday morning. If you see a party going on Friday night, Saturday night, please call dispatch. We'll send officers right over there immediately. So if everybody could please use real time and call the Pitt dispatch, and we could dispatch officers over there and handle any type of incidents that you would like us.
And that number, please,
Putting it in the chat.
put it in chat.
Thank you.
Okay, can we request that reports are actually filed when they're called to a residence? Because until we get reports filed, that little box doesn't get checked and it doesn't go through the system as, you know, a repeat call. It kind of washes out. We just want to, you know, like for the last, 3-4 weeks, I know you've been called to one house in particular every weekend. And it just seems to me that this has kind of gotten a little bit absurd, that after the second time, it should have been no more. But because there is no actual legal paperwork tied to any of these calls, you can call and there's no paperwork, it just goes, you know, it's not being registered anywhere. And, you know, John Karski, who's nuisance property, how can he, you know, build any kind of cases as far as nuisance property if he's not getting the information sent to him, which unless it's filed as a report, doesn't happen.
And as far as we know, or at least what we heard, if the Pitt Police Office issue a citation, there is no pipeline to get that through that process, period. Like not just not happening on the city side, but even if the Pitt Police write a ticket, it does not go through the nuisance property pipeline, correct?
Mr. Karski, you are muted.
Yeah, that's correct, because unless through friendly conversation between the Pitt Police and Zone 4, we're not aware of it.
Officer Crowell, you have your hand raised again. Are you?
I was going to reiterate that if there is criminal mischief or there's damage done to some properties with people standing around, we need to be notified with it. I saw some questions in the chat about calling 911. We are dispatched obviously through 911, and if it's a Pitt property, a lot of times they will pass it over to them, or they monitor our police channel, so they step in some cases where it's either a university property or university student. So and it's also recorded in the computer aided dispatch for that address, so we have to search how many problems are at a particular address. Having that information in the 911 system is very helpful for us to get that. Obviously, if there's damage or anything like that, or something that needs to be reported, then you can, when it comes to our officers, you can ask for the report to be taken. Make sure that you get what is called the CCR number. That's the case number for that report, and any reports that are filed after that. So they were asking on that. I think that would cover the question, I believe.
Well, you're right, Lieutenant. Also, not only when you call 911, but 911 will put if they know the calls are coming to Oakland, 911 will send them right to our dispatch. And they'll contact Pitt Police for Oakland problems and issues. So if you don't call our dispatch, the number that Officer Cunningham put in our chat box, the 412-624-2121, you could just call 911 and ask to speak with Pitt officer, and I'll put you right through to Pitt dispatch.
It does sometimes help to tell 911 operators when you're calling that I have called on this particular property X number of times over the last week, 2 months, or whatever.
I would love for us to be able to revisit this topic at next week, next year, next month, year, what is time? at next month's Oakwatch meeting, if it would be possible for us to follow up again with the university to just be able to track the extent of the citations, whether we manage to communicate with residents that they should in fact actually file the complaint with the police who do show up, and whether or not we can see any improvement in the nuisance property recordings that are being made. Bob Charland, you had one more thing that you wanted to be able to say also about Wells Fest?
Yeah, sorry, and I know you're trying to move us forward, and
It's okay. We're great.
For just a quick second. So the councilman, him and I actually just spoke, you know, in addition, you know, about Wells Fest, and one of the things that he brings up, and I think that the point that he's not going to let go is that Wells Fest was not required to have a insurance liability. And although we find that the special events seems to be sort of haphazard in when they do and do not require insurance. For example, well, I won't go into that, but there's something councilman wants to look at moving forward, is that do we need to make sure events of these size do have the correct insurance? Because I very much believe that if we would have told a student you have to be able to provide $1 million liability insurance, that he would not have been able to produce that, or insurance, you know, it would be very challenging, I should say. We also want to make sure that that is not, we're not discriminating, and we're not, we want to make sure we're balancing that across the board correctly, and not just saying that, okay, Oakland and events happening, you got to have insurance because we think there can be underage drinking. We don't want to come after Oakland specifically for that. We need to make sure to level that correctly, but that's an avenue that councilman is harping on, and thinks that it would be important that we make sure that policy is ironclad.
There's a question in the chat which I think fits right in with what you were just saying, Bob. So if you wouldn't mind expanding a wee bit. The question is, are the property owners on the block where the permit is issued informed that the permit has been requested or an application has been submitted? Because in this particular case, you know, obviously the insurance that would apply is that you know, adheres to the properties themselves, and the landlords are the ones that would be on the hook if people actually got injured on the property as a result of this kind of activity. So, is that something that can be done?
Yeah, and I mean, in theory, if the neighbors were notified of
not the neighbors, but the property owners.
Sorry, okay, I see what you're saying. So the property owners, not the tenants themselves.
Right.
That's an interesting angle. I'm not sure that we have looked into that, but that's definitely something that probably people should be aware of.
It's another argument for rental registration.
I was
Why
just
we need it, even if it's free.
Yeah, I was going to say if we had a great record of who these landlords were, it would be super easy for us to get that. But
it could be something that could be asked for of students who are, for instance, under 21 or something. For instance, they could be, you know, you would need to supply some sort of evidence that the property owners had also been notified.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Then. Yeah, I got a lot of ideas on that, but
very good.
Point taken. Who was that? Rebecca.
Okay, very, very cool. And I believe that Alex Toner, you also had something that you wanted to be able to say.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I appreciate that. For those that don't know, I'm Alex Toner. I work in engagement and community affairs with Lena, and our office is usually front and center in community, in the meetings, and at community events. And we very much value the opportunity to hear from you and speak with you. And I want you to know that we take these concerns very seriously. I want to just speak a little bit as we wrap up here, just to the front end process, the preemptive process. So part of what our office does is works with the stakeholders on the phone tonight from Pitt, as well as some of our community organizations and members here, to really try to work year round, year after year, to try to build out our Be a Good Neighbor program, right? And that happens year round through things like our block parties, which we just concluded, where we saw a lot of student and long-term resident engagement, things like our tenant workshops that we hold in the fall and the spring, the safety walks that Kenyon mentioned, the Adopt a Block programs with OPDC that we promote in order to try to promote pride of place with students who live in the neighborhood. And so, you know, as part of that, we continue to think of ways that we can message to our students what it means to be part of the community, what it means to live in a vibrant neighborhood like Oakland year round. And to that end, you know, Lena and myself and Jamie, when she's not on maternity leave, are out in community. We're also responding to some of these issues, speaking with residents, following up on things. We've actually had landlords proactively reach out to us over the past couple of weeks when they have found out that there's been maybe a disruptive night at their residence, and ask us how what they can do to try to be part of the solution too. And those are things we want to continue to hear. So I just encourage you to continue to use our office as a resource as we continue to move forward to try to get some solutions out there, but also continue to get some messaging out there to hopefully get ahead of some of these things. By and large, you know, a lot of our students are good neighbors. We know we're here tonight because it wasn't the fact recently. The message doesn't always get out there, but we are trying to work hard to make sure that we're hearing from you and doing what we can to get it out to our students on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis throughout the year.
I would like to wrap up with one last question for Pitt, because I was so shocked at seeing the students shoulder to shoulder. I checked what the published student vaccination rate was on that day, the COVID vaccination rate, and what was published was 54%. And so I was wondering if the planners faced any disciplinary action for violating COVID protocol.
Yeah, thanks, Elena. Yeah, I think so. Our COVID protocol, I don't believe was violated by what I saw. I mean, what we're requiring students to do is wear a mask when they're in university facilities. Masks are not required outdoors, and certainly on public property, non-university property. We have no jurisdiction for that. And we also didn't see any increases in COVID cases from that time. Our student vaccination rate is around 93% for all students, 96% for undergraduate students, actually, and 94% for undergraduate students and 95% for our graduate and professional students. So we have a highly vaccinated student population. At that time, it was quite frankly underreported because we didn't have a lot of information from our off-campus students. But in terms of violating our health and safety, there was no health and safety standard that we have in place that appeared to be violated by that. Does it look uncomfortable? Does it create a lot of anxiety based on the environment we're in? Absolutely, but technically they were not, to my knowledge, from what I could tell, violating any of our health and safety standards.
Thank you. As Andrea said, we will be revisiting this. So now we're going to close this topic and move on to the OPDC updates. Thank you so much for all of your participation.
I think we're in midstream here. Thank you very much, Elena. Thank you very, very much to all of the university representatives who came and to public safety for talking with us about this, and also to Bob Charland for representing the councilman. It's a very complicated and highly layered issue, and we appreciate that there's a lot of different ways in which these kinds of conversations can go. Grateful also to all of my neighbors for examples that they're providing of some actions that need better attention, and we will continue to try and keep Pitt Police better informed. We look forward to having a conversation again about this next month to see where we are with if there's any noticeable improvement, and whether or not we can get any kinds of numbers about the kinds of actions that have been taken. So Kathy, thank you so much for driving the bus today. I am reminded that opdc.org/Oakwatch resources, Oakwatch-resources is the website where we keep flyers from our community partners and information about code enforcement that we collect every month is all there. Next week is our monthly design advisory meeting. The Oakland-wide meeting returns next Tuesday at 6 o'clock. UPMC will be presenting new campus-wide signage, and the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh is sharing plans for new banners on Shenley Drive and Shenley Drive Extension. The Zoom info is there and was also on our calendar on our website. I want to add that as a we may find that we would like to be able to also extend the conversation next week to include some of the topics that we're talking about today. So if you feel that this conversation is not done, especially after the next topic that we're about to discuss in zoning, I know there's a lot there, please do feel free to attend that meeting and we can extend it for a better conversation after the fact. I also want to make sure that everybody's aware we have a really, really exciting program that we are totally thrilled to be able to offer, in which we are opening applications for a grant program, a limited period of time and a limited number of grants that we can make that is designed to be able to encourage Black home ownership in Oakland. So low and moderate income Black, Indigenous, and people of color are encouraged to apply for funds to become Oakland Community Land Trust homeowners. There are 7 grants available between $21,000 and $31,000 that can be used either towards the down payment on a house or actually to just build up savings. It's an amazing opportunity and we're really excited to be able to offer this. If you know of anybody who has dreamed of returning to Oakland or who is actively looking for a house in Oakland who meets these criteria, please let us know and encourage them to apply. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my boss, Wanda Wilson, who is has extensive personal and professional experience in the topic that we are about to discuss, which is zoning in Oakland. And Wanda, please take it away.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for attending tonight. So this is our discussion opportunity to discuss a topic of interest with residents in our community. And so the topic tonight is zoning. There's several reasons why this is important to have as this month's Let's Talk topic. And we're in the middle of a plan process, which will inform some potential changes to zoning in the neighborhood. And I think sometimes people just often have questions about how zoning works. And we really want to focus a conversation with our residents this evening about, what is the kind of process that is the right sort of process in our community or any community in the city to be thoughtful and planful about changes to our zoning map. So we have a couple of resources and we'll do a little bit of a tutorial and then we'll talk about a current threat before us for sure. But before we do that, we have a snip here of some of the zoning districts that we have on the zoning map in a portion of the neighborhood, a little bit of Central and South Oakland here on this map. We can come back to refer to this if we need to during our discussion. And then on the next slide, we have some information about just the types of zoning districts that we have in Oakland currently. And there are several different components and different actual districts, but they're bucketed here in residential districts, commercial and mixed use districts, public realm districts, and we have a specially planned districts. So the residential districts, we saw some of those on the map and many of you are familiar with residential districts, the thing that we have in our zoning code that's pretty interesting is that you'll often see there's sort of a hyphen. It might say R1A hyphen H. So it's both the housing type and the density of the property that combines to make that that zoning district. So we have R1A districts, which is single unit attached. We have R1D districts, single unit detached. We have R2, which allows duplexes, and R3, which is a 3-unit dwelling, and RM, which is 4 units and above in a multi-unit district. For each of those districts, you also have a density component to it. And that is actually really important because that also defines how much lot size you need to have in order to determine how many units you really can build in an R2, R3, or RM district. And that depends on if you're in the low density, very low density, moderate, high, or very high. So there's 5 density categories, and that really helps us to shape the zoning districts according really to, they were mapped according to really what our neighborhood fabric exists today. And our commercial, we don't have a lot of commercial mixed use districts. We have, it's called LNC, local neighborhood commercial, in a couple of areas in the smaller commercial districts in the area. Then the bulk of other areas that aren't residential are Oakland public realm districts. So there are 4 of those. The district that covers the 5th and Forbes Business District, Craig Street, Atwood Street, and the Boulevard of the Allies. And those were created for really because Oakland is unique, and they actually allow us to have zoning that's really tailored to those areas and focused on the unique characteristics in those areas, and actually have a pretty creative approach to the intention and the purpose of those districts, kind of geared toward each area, understanding that Oakland is a place where there are a lot of mix of uses that meet up with each other. And we have some specially planned districts down on 2nd Avenue, and the large building at Craig Street and Center is actually a specially planned district, and that's where the zoning is actually defined specifically, incorporates the building design as part of the zoning, and it usually that it says this is the kind of building that you can build here. So the zoning becomes the program for development, actually, in a very specific way. So then the next slide, again, we can come back to this if we have questions. The next slide is the process that we would go through as a community to enact zone changes. And really, you know, in what we've seen in our experience and in other communities across the city is that there's a lot of planning that goes into it in terms of community process, a lot of planning and analysis. That happens first, and then regulations come forward after that point to implement the plan. We're in the middle of a plan process now with the Department of City Planning. We'll talk about that more. You know, we've seen the zoning that we have today is the public realm districts are actually in direct relationship to a plan process that was done in the late 90s called the Oakland Improvement Strategy. Copies on our website if you're not familiar. Some of you probably participated. I participated in that when I worked at the Department of City Planning. And that was a very iterative and thoughtful process that focused on very specific, it wasn't an overall master plan for the entire neighborhood, but it did focus on some gateway improvements and real look at zoning and some corridor improvements in that strategy. So it was a very iterative, robust community engagement process to create that plan. And that plan then led to some zoning recommendations that were then implemented, again, through a very robust process of everybody getting opportunity to see what's being proposed, have thoughts and ideas about that. How does the zoning legislation fit with the planning and visioning that had gone through a plan process before? That's when really the Oakland public realm districts were conceived and drafted, and a lot of community engagement at that time about those districts and how it met the goals and intention of what was discussed in that planning process. And then normally, as happened then, the Department of City Planning works with a community on an engagement process about potential zone changes. And there's lots of back and forth. It's not something that is reasonable to be done in a very, very short period of time. So like I said, like what we will have happen with the Oakland plan process, and like what happened with the Oakland improvement strategy, and as other neighborhoods in this city have done very thoughtful planning processes that may lead to zone changes, it takes time to do it right. And then city planning would draft the legislation, continuing, through that community engagement process. Then it gets introduced as part of the City Planning Commission's agenda. And there's a lot of public notices that go out before the Planning Commission holds a hearing. And the Planning Commission would take action, take a lot of testimony from the public at Planning Commission. And there would also be a development activities meeting with the registered community organization prior to the Planning Commission. If the City Planning Commission would have a positive recommendation about that, then legislation is drafted and sent to City Council. And City Council also has public hearings at that point before it can be actually enacted into law. If the Planning Commission were to deny a proposal, and for whatever reason, it would still try, the applicant would still try to move it forward, would have to have a supermajority. But I have never really seen that instance happen. So what we have in front of us, which many of you have probably read about, is that a private developer has drafted up a zoning ordinance without any participation from the community, without the Department of City Planning. And this ordinance has been introduced in City Council this week, which again, if we review what if we remember what I just said about the process, this is alarming because of certainly the content, which we can get into, but certainly the process. So a piece of zoning legislation to create a new Oakland Public Realm zoning district has been put forth. It was written by a private development entity on its own behalf and submitted by the mayor's office to City Council. The City Planning Department was not involved, and we didn't do all that engagement that I talked about before. So this is alarming to us because we believe that that's an injustice to our community. We can go on to the next slide. That they have the map there that I showed you before with a whole area of Halkett Street, a whole area of McKee. And all of those areas are proposed to be, a broad mix of uses. They're both residential zoning today. And the text of the ordinance, which we've been able to read, talks talks about there's all kinds of commercial uses being allowed, and buildings that could be 125 feet with a 25% height bonus, making buildings 156 feet allowed by right in 2 of those districts, and in the area that's closer to the Boulevard of the Allies, 150 feet with a 25% bonus, 187 feet. So if we think about the what that might actually end up, looking like, it would really create change the whole character of that area of the neighborhood, be very inconsistent with what's there in terms of neighborhood fabric, and involve whole-scale demolition of large swaths of our neighborhood. And one of the areas, that they're, again, it's the neighborhood fabric being destroyed and residential areas being turned to commercial, is what this ordinance proposes. We could go to the next slide for some summaries of issues that we see that hasn't been in any kind of involvement with the Department of City Planning. These are our professional planners. These are our public servants working on all of our behalf to look out for the public interest and do things in the proper process. That department hasn't had the opportunity to do that. And the Oakland plan process is going on, and this is being rushed through in some way with big media blitz about it, which is completely counter to the Oakland plan process. Also, we'd like to talk more as a community about a new mechanism that we have in the city called inclusionary zoning. And that's one of the things we don't have here in Oakland, but our neighbors in Lawrenceville have really led the way in inclusionary zoning, which means that it has a mechanism in place for new development to generate some resources to support the building of affordable housing. And that's a high priority for us. We know that it's a big need in the neighborhood and a high priority. So we would really like to see if anything was rushed through any kind of process with Department of City Planning involvement and lots of community input, of course. We would really want it to be inclusionary zoning that would go forward first. Next slide. And a couple more things. So no affordable housing, the massive amounts of demolition, and the zoning doesn't address this, but some of the media materials show a taking of the public park at Zulima. And the zone change on Halkett would essentially, represents a zoning change for an area that Oakland 2025 identifies as a homeowner preservation priority. This decimates the neighborhood fabric. The buildings would be completely out of scale with the neighborhood fabric, and the media blitz that we've seen is a very serious distortion of community input in the plan. It's cherry picking various things that maybe one or two people have said, and that process is not complete, hasn't been vetted, hasn't had a chance to really churn through all the comments that people have made. So we'd like to talk with you more about this and get people's thoughts on whether you agree with us that this is concerning, and answer any questions that you have. Again, I've worked here at OPDC for a long time, but before that, worked at Department of City Planning and have a lot of planning and zoning expertise to offer to you all. I'm happy to do that and want to hear what you have to say. Next slide, we'd really like to encourage people to get involved, and all of that area that is included in the proposed ordinance is in Councilman Bruce Cross's district. So here is his contact information, and we encourage you all to be in touch with him immediately on if you have concerns.
So Rhonda, one thing that wasn't mentioned in your slide there was that for this outrageous plan to even remotely work, it's going to take some equally outrageous changes in traffic setups, especially on the Boulevard of the Allies and Bate Street, that process hasn't even begun. And those are typically years in the making just to get approval.
Again, I don't consider, I think it's important, Mark, to point out that, things that people put out in a media package doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually any kind of real development proposal or, real proposal that we all have to think has any legitimacy to it. So I do think that's important. I thank you for bringing that up. And the plan process would also really have a lot of recommendations for infrastructure and changes to streets. And certainly there's lots of areas for improvement and investment and change. But we need to do things the right way. And with the residents' voices being heard, with equity and development, affordable housing being included, and other priorities for the community to be included.
I'd like to just offer, thank you so much, Wanda. Just a small point of information about how this actually has gone down, what the timing is. So the bill from the mayor's office that was not submitted through city planning was sent to city council on Friday for inclusion in Tuesday's regular meeting. At that regular meeting, Councilman Bobby Wilson submitted the bill on the mayor's behalf, but as the sitting chair of the Standing Committee on Land Use and Economic Development for consideration it was remanded to the Standing Committee's meeting for next week. And if there is no objection or obstacle to the process, it is the expectation that the Standing Committee would then send that to the Planning Commission, at which point there is, as we understand it, a 90-day period in which Planning Commission has to review this proposed legislation, solicit public input. There would be a design advisory meeting, there would be a hearing, and then the Planning Commission would submit its recommendations within that 90-day period back to City Council. That is, as Wanda was explaining, very different from the iterative, comprehensive process that the current ongoing neighborhood comprehensive plan is undertaking, right? So instead of months of different meetings and people seeing successive maps of how everything fits together and how things could conceivably work, and like what the specific priorities are for the neighborhood, about where they want to see greater density, where they want to see less density. Instead, this would be a single like yes or no on a particular little plot for 90 days, and then boom. So that is, I think, probably the urgency that people are feeling is this particular process that is being triggered. And I just wanted to add that if anybody would like to join in a petition to have a public hearing on this proposed legislation in advance of it being sent to public to the Planning Commission, if you could please direct message me your name and address, and I will visit you tomorrow to get your signature on said petition.
If I could, I had a couple of other thoughts I might mention. As people start, every resident will be busy responding to Andrea's suggestion there. Well, I add one more thing, that we'll put an analysis of this draft on our website. I haven't gotten that done yet, but I will say that you can really see a difference in the content between they're calling it a public realm zoning district, but it really doesn't meet the test of sort of the goals and intention. If we see, and again, we'll have an analysis of this in a blog post in it, this week, but each public realm district it's in the zoning ordinance on the city's website, on the municipal Municode website. It has a very nice purpose statement about sort of what's the intentionality. And then you read this that was written by a corporate interest with only their own monetary gain to be had, really just really doesn't have the same tone. You can really see a difference. And a lot of the things that planning geeks like me really focus on, they just, oh, there's no residential compatibility standards, there's no floor area ratio. And one of the most important components that's listed in the purpose district, the purpose statement for the public realm, is that it protects, goal is to protect less intensive units from less intensive uses from impacts of more intensive uses, is completely left out of here, curiously. So there's lots of problems and lots of concerns with this. And we'll have further analysis that could help people if we get to a point of actually having to provide testimony on it.
Does anybody have any questions for Wanda or anybody else?
So some years ago when Oakland Gateway Ventures came up, and at least the topic of transferring and changing public property, there was a very long process described at that time, none of which is part of this. Was that some process that was unbeknownst to them at the time? Is this a new process?
Well, it's good, again, to bring that up. So, we have been here before with a private developer thinking that they can just take a city park. And we did a lot of research and, had public entities from the Urban Redevelopment Authority and other people at the city describe the process for if the city would, in some instance, transfer ownership of a public park, and we will regenerate that information again to put that on the website as well. It's not simple for the city to do that. They would have to go through a very extensive process with the law department, the Urban Redevelopment Authority, and an entity, public entity called Orphans Court. So it's not a simple process. And that would be the other thing to to mention to Councilman Krause if people are concerned about that piece of public property. I mean, the Oakland plan process really envisions that as continuing to be a public open space and something that actually gets improved. So rather than just hand it over to a private developer interest as a development site.
We had a question earlier in the chat about whether or not Pitt has a position on this. And I know, Lena, if you're still on the, sorry, I can't see the participants, but Lena, if you're still here, perhaps you'd like to be able to offer Pitt's statement.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everybody again. So Pitt has two sites that fall within the acreage that Walnut Capital is looking for a rezoning of. We did not propose this rezoning and we didn't shape the rezoning. I want to be really clear with everybody that we anticipate that there's going to be a lot of public comment and public input about this, and we will also be commenting. And so, just to be clear about which sites are ours, for those of you who might not know, it's what is known as the Quality Inn site. It's where the Panera and the hotel is on top, which is slated for redevelopment as a grocery store on the bottom and non-student housing on top. The other is where the dilapidated townhouses on Bates Street were torn down, which in the short term, even midterm, we have no plans for that other than sort of planting grass and letting that be. So that's where we're at today. Thanks, Andrea.
And I also wanted to maybe offer some clarification. I think I'm seeing some of the questions we're starting to maybe conflate two things together. So the zoning of a particular area does not affect the ownership of the parcels in it. So what is being proposed is that the city's park of Zulema would be included in this larger Oakland Public Realm E zone. It is right now, maybe we can see the previous map that we had begun this whole thing with. It is right now that Zulema Park is zoned within the Oakland Public Realm for the Boulevard of the Allies. It's there. The zoning in which it falls does not change its ownership or its use. So it is still a city-owned park. Walnut Capital's development plan, right, does include their hope that they might be able to engage with the city to allow them to develop that private park, perhaps in exchange for another piece of property elsewhere nearby. But that isn't part of the zoning legislation. So the two things are a little bit separate, but obviously it is still part of the larger project. So just wanted to make sure people had that clear. Is that, does that answer your question, Elena? You had a question in the chat.
Yes, and I just wanted to know if that was common, if it had been done.
They would have to go through the same process of.
Yeah, that was really my question. Thank you. Yeah, if it was the same process for a swap.
Right, it would be. And I would say to Jeff's comment in the chat that I don't think it's actually easy to change zoning, but yeah, we certainly want to reach out to other of our colleagues in the community development world. As I've been talking to folks who weren't as aware of what's happening, people are very alarmed with the process by which a private entity would have the mayor introduce this completely outside of their own planning department, and have been quite appalled and alarmed by that. So yeah, I do think that we can certainly reach out to our colleagues across the city. Andrea mentioned before that, you know, next week we do have the Oakland-wide meeting. We could pick up this conversation after the presentations if people are interested in doing that. We could even talk more about some of the recommendations from the Oakland plan process and dig into that a little bit more, which we're not going to have time to do tonight because we're running out of time.
We did get an offer from Derek Doffin, who is the lead planner for the Oakland plan process, to perhaps invite Corey Lehman, who's the city zoning administrator, for a future conversation on this topic. If people would like to get deeper into the zoning process for the city and or how this fits into their larger program, to be a resource and available for questions as well. If that's something that people are interested in, happy to make that happen.
I think that's a great idea.
The main thing tonight, we just wanted to really get people engaged and informed, you know, on the current situation and taking some action. Please have your neighbors do some emails and phone calls, please.
Everybody's very quiet. Has it just been a very long meeting?
I'll break the silence here briefly though.
I would imagine people are really interested.
So I had asked, I think at least at a few other meetings, I don't remember if it was at Oakwatch, but so there is a way typically to save the chat text and keep that, I guess, with the minutes of this meeting that's going to be posted later. Can we make sure that happens?
We do that, yes. We do take the public chat from our public meetings, and it does get appended to the minutes.
Thank you.
Blythe is raising her hand. So
yeah, I have my hand raised. I'm sort of speaking not for any official person. All I am is the elections judge for the last quarter of a century here in this district. All we want to know in Shenley Farms is when's the next corporate takeover for us? I mean, we're all residential too. So it was just to let you know that there are a number of Shenley Farms residents who are very interested and very concerned about this whole thing. So, and I'll shut up.
Thank you.
Isn't Shenley Farms designated historic though?
Well, historic gives you you don't know how little protection that entails.
Okay.
Very little. The city designation of our residential type is the most protection we have.
Okay.
I have a question, Millie.
Hey, Millie.
I was interested in Bob Harper's mentioning there that part of CMU is built on park property. I was not aware of that, and I guess I wonder if he could tell us a little bit about that, or where we could find out more information about that. And does this set precedent?
Yeah, can you hear me? This is
Yeah.
Bob Harper. Okay, I noticed that when we were planning to build a bicycle lane along the railroad. So I started looking at the properties along the railroad to see who owned them. And I was surprised to find out that the older buildings on Carnegie Mellon's campus next to Flagstaff Hill are all on city land. And I asked various people in the real estate department at the city to look into this, and they confirmed, yeah, it is city land, and they presume that Carnegie worked out a deal with the current mayor. And at that time, he reached some agreement, like a 99-year lease or whatever. And apparently that has never been revisited. So despite my asking like 3 different people at the city over the last 2.5 years, which, you know, naturally COVID came in the middle of it, and people saying they would get back to me, the only thing they got back to me was to say they didn't know how it happened, what the process was, or why, or if CMU is now paying some sort of $1 a year rent or whatever for the privilege of having massive buildings.
Well, let's see.
Many acres of city land.
If it was a 100-year lease, then maybe the 100-year is up, and we can ask them to take down some of those buildings.
Well, or you could ask them to renegotiate and maybe pay some money to the city that's appropriate.
Right, yeah.
At least pay property taxes, yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we don't want to mention this to Walnut Capital, huh?
Well, maybe we don't, but maybe we should find out what went on, because the knowledge would be used as precedent. And I'm sure that perhaps the mayor knows, or those close to him. And knowledge is power. And if they have all the knowledge and we don't, then that's to our detriment.
Walnut Capital has a paid consultant with us tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, they're here.
Yeah.
I'd like to also mention that some of you may reside in other council districts other than Bruce Crowell. So please contact your own council person if you're either in Councilperson Strasburger's district or Councilman LaBelle's district.
Right. And maybe the paid consultant can do what we can't do and find out what the reasons were for that.
Well, what we do know, and I would say, you know, is that we do have concrete information that when we were faced with this with Oakland Gateway Ventures, we had current city staff give us that information about the process that would need to be followed. And again, we will, you know, it's on our website, kind of buried in that, but we'll get that back out and provide that, reconfirm everything. It's not an easy process, even with that, you know, information about Carnegie Mellon. That is not the only, you know, it's not, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a precedent. So.
thank you.
I was going to say, Bob, that your saga with trying to get an answer about the city-owned parcels underneath CMUs very closely hews to my own attempt to figure out who permitted Phipps to be able to close Free Street Extension, which is actually owned by the city still, and nobody seems to know. It's a mystery. All the agencies, everybody passing the buck. I'm still not done on that one. Anyway.
Yeah, well, apparently the documents may be in archival storage. They don't seem to have been, it seems like it was 1950, as I recall, when they started to update and put into a way of recording that they could retrieve the information that went into that decision. And of course, that was well before that time.
Yeah, most definitely. Does anybody else have any other questions? Or have I missed anything that somebody's put into the chat? Thanks very much, everybody, for giving us your time this evening. I really appreciate it. It's 7:30, and I appreciate that the people are hungry for dinner. We really, really are grateful to you for sharing your time with us this evening. And here is some information about the upcoming meetings. Please visit these links. Let me know that my email has been dropped into the chat if you have any further suggestions or comments. There is also a comment for this meeting, comment box available for this meeting at opdc.org/let's talk. And you can find the minutes from this meeting once we get them typed up, as well as the recording. And there is a space there for you to put comments in, and we will record and amplify those. So please feel free to let us know. And if you have suggestions for future topics, we also really welcome that. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate it, and have a lovely, lovely evening.